So welcome to the Clean Water Fund info session. I'm Megan Blackman with Lancaster Clean Water Partners. We also have Pam Wise and Matt Coffroth here from the Lancaster County Conservation District. We co-administer the Countywide Action Plan Implementation Grant. Um, so I'm going to run through this process. So what we're going to cover today is we have three options for you this year for applications. So we'll run through what each of those mean, the general requirements and the process that we go through, including applications and evaluations. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into each of those options. And we should have plenty of time for questions today. Please do hold them till the end, or you can enter them into the chat throughout, and then we'll try to make sure we get to everybody. All right, so this is the countywide action plan implementation funding. So it all goes back to the countywide action plan for Lancaster County, which was developed in 2018. So the funding is primarily through DEP. Some of it is federal funding. And then Lancaster County, through the Conservation District, has the opportunity to apply annually for the CAP funding. It's CAP for short. So please do take a look at the plan. It was just updated last year in 2024. I am going to share a couple of links in the chat to both the CAP, where you can read through it and make sure you're aware of what's in there and that any BMPs in an application should be called out in the CAP, but also to the Clean Water Fund page on our website where all this information is. And a recording of this info session will also be posted on there after. But the CAP outlines how we, as Lancaster County as a whole, are going to be reducing nitrogen and phosphorus ultimately for improvement of the Chesapeake Bay, but first and kind of most importantly for our local waterways. So we do have three options this year. The first option, which we're calling option one, is for agricultural best management practices on ag land, of course, or stream projects on ag land that can be completed rather quickly, definitely by April of 2026. And we're also including in that option if there are damages to previously funded CAP projects that need funding to replace things like trees or other repair of BMPs. We're working with DEP on what may be eligible for repair, so we can't guarantee that that'll be funded, but we can consider it. So we have about 650,000 or so available for allocation under the first option. And then for option two, this is looking ahead to what we as Lancaster County are applying for to DEP for CAP funding for 2026. So we don't know the funding allocation for option two. So we should find out that around the end of the year. So we're asking for applications by September 15th for this one. And then that would be for CAP funding for 2026 and for projects that can be reasonably completed by the end of March of 2027. And that can be any kind of best management practice. It does not have to be ag BMPs for that one. And then we have a third option, which is just for technical assistance for ag projects. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about all of those in just a few minutes. Again, check the website for all the detail as well. For the construction projects, which would be option one, option two, the grantee needs to be a municipality, a nonprofit, or a landowner. And then we have a brief application form. I'll give you a little preview of that in just a minute. But what you'll do is fill out the application, and then we have a team of local advisors who ultimately decide the funding decisions. So even though the funding goes through DEP and they do have a say, they have to approve of the projects, it's really local decision makers who decide how our funding is going to be spent and the criteria that we'll go over in a few minutes. There are different timelines for each of these options, so it is a little confusing, so make sure you're paying attention to which option you're applying for and when it's due and the other dates associated with that. So we as the Clean Water Partners help to do this process that we're doing now, like putting out the request for projects and getting the applications in and what that all looks like. But then once the project determinations are made by our advisors, it's turned over to the conservation district who receives the funding to administer the grants. So Pam and Matt are on the call. So if you get a grant award, it's Pam that you'll be dealing with, the grants coordinator for the conservation district. So here's a little preview of our application. I'm not going to go through line by line with you. This is just a screenshot of what I'm calling the application preview that's available on our website. So the application is a Google form. And then if you go to the application preview link on our website, you can see all of the questions. So you can, copy and paste that into Word or Google Doc or whatever you prefer to be working on the application beforehand. And don't get daunted by how long it looks here, because you'll see as you go throughout, depending upon how you answer in different sections, it'll direct you to a different section to fill out. So it's not necessarily the entire length of the application that you'll be filling out. We did try to make it as streamlined as we possibly can, given the state and federal requirements of the program. So we are, trying to ask you as few questions as possible to get the information that we need. It is a Google form, so please do at any point in this, let me know if you have any questions or have any problems with it. You will need to contact me as you are applying, because you'll have uploads most likely, whether it be photos or conservation plans or designs. And so contact me and I'll create a folder in Google for you to be uploading those documents into. And sooner rather than later would be preferred for that. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Pam to go over these requirements.
Well, good afternoon. It's a nice rainy day. This basically gives you some very basic requirements. Of course, your agreement would go over all of those requirements, and then the Things to Know document also has further information. So you'll want to refer to that document for some of the ones that are listed. Again, an applicant can be a municipality, a nonprofit, or landowner. Construction funding is provided on a reimbursement basis after the BMP is implemented. And that basically means if you have several BMPs, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Matt, but if you have several BMPs, you can have one BMP inspected and finished and submit construction for that, invoices for construction. If it's all one big BMP, then you have to wait until it's completely finished. Consultation or contractual invoices can be submitted at any given time. The practices on ag land must be included in your ag E&S or conservation plan or M&NM plans. And we need those plans submitted to the Lancaster County Conservation District before the grant agreement is signed. If your project's going to be more than $25,000, prevailing wage is required. And for submission of reimbursement, you need to have the first and last payroll actually notarized. Sealed bidding is required if your project is $250,000 or more. If it's less than that, then you can get 3 quotes, and of course it should go to the lowest of those quotes, or tell us why you're going with a different provider. So those are just the basic requirements. Again, refer to the Things to Know document, or if you have further questions, certainly contact one of us.
Great, thanks, Pam.
You're welcome.
So I did see one question in the chat about whether it's possible to bundle projects within an application. And we do prefer that you submit a single application for each project, because depending on where they're located, it will affect how they score. And there's individual questions for landowner name and address and location, that kind of thing. All right, so the option one is again for ag projects that can be completed rather quickly. So they really need to be already like underway as far as design goes, and permitting would have started by now. So the key dates are listed on here for this option. So this one, the applications are due in just a couple of weeks on August the 15th. You do use the Google form. Again, this category does include repairs for weather-related damage. So this is the one that you would be applying under. And then we'll try to, do it as a fairly quick turnaround as far as decisions go and agreements go. So our goal is to have agreements in place by September 15th, just a month later. And then we have no wiggle room for the timeline for the grants that would be awarded with this funding. So the end date would be April 30th of 2026, and there would be no possibility for extensions there. I will say if you apply under option one and your project doesn't get selected for funding, we will automatically then like consider it for the next option that we'll talk about for the 2026 CAP funding. We may need to ask you a couple more clarifying questions, because you'll see in a minute that the criteria is a little bit more involved for the option two, but you won't need to submit a separate application. Also, if you had applied for the ACAP program and did not receive funding for that, there are questions in this application concerning that. And then if you did apply, it's an even shorter application for you here, because we will still look at the materials that you submitted under ACAP. We'll just be asking if anything has changed and trying to get a little bit more of the contextual picture of the project, as far as how it fits into the work being done in the watershed. All right, so if you submit a project under option one, here's the main things that we're looking for decision making. The primary thing, because of the short timeline, is the timeline. So we really want to see that it's feasible by April 30th of 2026. So especially if it's a stream project on ag land, we want to see those permits in place, so it can move forward as quickly as possible. And then the consistency with the cap is for any of these projects in any category. If it does have a stream on the property, we want to see that it's a forested riparian buffer with exclusion fencing, either already implemented or you're planning to implement it with this funding, or at the same time using other funding. We already talked about the repairs for weather-related damage. We're also looking at past performance of the project lead and the technical service providers that are working with the project. And that's like, did you complete the reports on time, and was the project as a whole completed in a timely manner, and that it was done well? So our internal CAP admin team, which is Matt, Pam, Allison, and I, will make recommendations given this criteria to our advisors, but our advisors have the ultimate say for which projects are funded. So now for option two, again, this is um, for a little bit later, but still a fairly quick turnaround. So projects need to be completed by March of 2027 under this option two. This is for construction projects of any kind of BMP. And the applications are due September 15th. And then what we do is we gather the information that we get in September, and then put it forward to DEP, as long as it's a good fit for the CAP, in October. And we'll let you know then if we are including your application into DEP. But we don't find out until December how much funding Lancaster is getting for the 2026 CAP program. In the interim, we will have our advisory team score the applications, and they'll meet probably in early December to discuss and make funding decisions, so that right after we find out the funding allocations, we're able to move forward as soon as we can with agreements, and have those in place at the beginning of the year, And then again, you have till March 2027. So if you are putting forth ag BMP projects for this, as Pam said earlier, the practices need to be in the conservation plan or manure management plan, nutrient management plan. So if those plans need to be updated, you don't necessarily have to have it with the application, but you do need that in place and supplied to the district, and it had been reviewed by them to make sure that those practices are in there before any grant agreement can be signed. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is the criteria that our advisors use for scoring for the option two. Some of it is very similar to what I just went over for option one. The differences here are that they will be looking at nitrogen loading reductions and also what we call nitrogen efficiency, which is where they're taking into account the grant funding that's being requested. So no match is actually required for the program, but in this calculation of grant money divided by nitrogen reductions, that's really where any match would come into play in scoring. Because if you're requesting less grant funding, but you're still, getting the full nitrogen reduction, then you'll get a higher score there. We also look at a couple of things depending upon where the project is located. And you don't necessarily, there are no application questions about this, so you don't have to fill this in, but just be aware that we do look at this as the opportunity score of the catchment where the project's located. And you can find that in our collaborative mapping tool and whether or not it's in a disadvantaged community. So we'll look at that on the back end and scores are assigned for that. Other things that we look at are what partners are involved and really like what role they're playing in making sure that you're talking to your community and talking to the municipality, the watershed group, any other stakeholders to make sure everyone's connected and plays a part here. Again, we ask about consistency of the cap. Another difference is that we do ask a little bit more questions here about the maintenance plan, um, making sure that there is a plan for maintenance and that it makes sense. Again, we're looking at past performance here, and then our advisors will meet in December to decide on the awards. All right, this third option is a little different. This is just for technical assistance for ag projects. Um, we don't have a set amount of funding in hand. Really, what we want to see is the demand for projects that are, starting to be in the pipeline because we know that technical assistance can be a barrier and it can be a delay for projects. So we're trying to get a rather accurate list of demand. And then we may be able to present that to DEP or other funding sources to help to expand the capacity here in Lancaster so that we can get projects in the ground faster ultimately. We do have some limited funding available now for projects within delisting catchments. So if projects come in that are in those areas, we may be able to fund them. Another opportunity is open for conservation districts to apply to DEP for technical assistance by a firm that they're contracting with. There are more rigorous requirements for that, so it just really depends on the project that's put forth in the timeline here. If at all possible, please do let me know by August 5th if you're intending on applying under option three. That just opens it up for maybe more possibility of funding. If we do decide if it's projects that DEP is looking for. And then the form is due on August 12th for this option. And then we'll try to get back to you pretty quickly in September about any selection or next steps that we're aware of. And then that'll happen. If we're moving forward with funding, it'll happen within about a 1-year time frame. All right, that's all I have for you today. So feel free to ask questions.
I know that this is Mauricio. I know that there might be more information in the um, document, but I was wondering, um, is there funding for project management in any of those options?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. So there are two primary categories in the budget. So there is construction funding and then what we call contractual. And contractual amount, you can request up to 25% of the construction amount that you're requesting. Again, that's of the construction amount, not the total grant amount. And that 25% contractual can include your project management time, your admin time, or um, fees by engineers or technical service providers.
There was a question in the chat, Megan, if option two is for construction funding only. No, I mean, you can, obviously, we want construction, but there can also be some permit and design associated with that if need be. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Reed, or not, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So it's that 25% cap on the construction amount, like we just went over, but it does need to include construction of BMPs for design to be eligible. It needs to be associated with the construction. Okay, well, again, just feel free to contact me at any point if you run into questions. Email is probably the best way, and then we have it documented as well if other people are asking the same question. Oh, Alexandra, I see another question. Is there project funding for project management? So again, track 3 for technical assistance is fairly undefined because it really depends on which funding source we're able to tap into. If we are. So I feel like we can't really say that yet. We don't have a limit on funding or a minimum for that matter. And why is the application limited to nonprofits, landowners, and municipalities? Um, I think, well, originally we were working with the community foundation to do applications, so we were keeping it consistent with their guidelines for nonprofits and municipalities, and then not going through the community foundation. We also have landowners as eligible. I'm guessing that the question is really why not for profits. I think one thing, it would be a conflict of interest for profit to include funding for their time without it ever, going through a procurement process. So I think that's one thing that we would have a challenge getting through DEP and EPA ultimately. Matt or Pam, do you have any other input there?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Megan. It's kind of DEP's issue that they kind of throw upon us. They would, it's that conflict of interest challenge. But yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll end it here, but please do reach out if you have any other questions.